Hey John, I'm just making another video about this mock historian project I'm working on. We've got the constant table. It's got the columns ID, type, value. I added another column display name for just information about each constant, but I've added some data here. So I'm going to show how we can use Spring to hook up to that table. Um, for all of our tables, we're going to have an entity. It's basically just a class, Java class that has this Spring at annotation calling it out as an entity and at table with the table name so that it can map this class to that table. And we just need all the same fields as columns with the same names. Um, and even getters and setters we don't have to provide if we use these at getter and at setter. And yeah, that'll be able to map this class to that table. And then every entity will have a repository, which is just an interface that extends this part of the Spring framework called JPA repository. And that basically provides all the SQL queries in the form of methods that we can call, and we actually don't even have to write the implementation for these. So find all is equivalent to select star from constant. If we wanted to, we could say find all by ID and then pass in an integer ID, and this would be equivalent to select star from constant where ID is equal to whatever we pass in here. And again, we don't have to actually write this. As long as it conforms to the naming convention, our method that JPA expects, it'll be able to do that. So that's a useful part of the framework. There is just being able to use these methods to to execute the SQL. We could provide SQL here as well. There's ways to do that. And one interesting thing too is joins. If you had if constant had if the constant table had a foreign key into another table, you would just that would just be instead of uh, a primitive like string or integer, you would have a property of that other entity type here, and that would implicitly be a join. So joins become very easy, and all the queries become very simple as well. So um, the way that we sort of use that as a REST endpoint is by way of the controller. So we have here a constant controller. This is the thing listening for HTTP traffic and then routing it based on the URL for the call that comes through um, to the appropriate method to then get that data. So in this case, any HTTP request coming in with the URL /API/constants, it's going to route it to this method here, and that's just got this instance of constant service, and it's going to that service has got a method get all constants. This returns that. Another thing the controller does is throw exceptions in the case that there is an exception, and that will basically map to the various HTTP error codes. So in this case, like if there weren't any records, we'd have a 204 or maybe a 404. Internal server error would be a 500. And again, it's just this at annotation is what kind of calls a lot of that stuff out. So it's a lot of boilerplate, but it also, uh, in the end, it's a lot. It's not a lot of code really to do a lot of this stuff. Um, Lastly, the service here. This is the thing. It's called with the at service. It's called out as a service. It has an instance of this constant repository, and this get all constants method really just calls find all on the repository, and then looks at the list. If it's empty, throws an exception, so we get a 204 or 404 back depending on what was here. In this case, it's a 204. But if there's data, we just iterate over it and map it to a simpler object for the front end. These JPA entities under the hood, there's not a lot of code here, but under the hood there's actually a lot of infrastructure. So Sometimes you don't want to actually send that back to the front end or whoever's calling the REST endpoint, especially if there's a lot of joins. You might have a lot of nested stuff. So it's common practice to have, in addition to an entity, also a DTO, data transfer object. So it's essentially a lighter weight version of that entity. It's kind of more or less just a struct. It's going to be the thing that's turned into JSON, basically, minus these functions here, which just kind of convert constant to constant DTO or vice versa. So that's what this line here is doing, just mapping over those, turning them into DTOs and then returning them to the front end. So we can start this up and actually see this in action. So it started on port 8080. So we'll go here, we'll go 8080/API/constants, and there's the data coming back. Here's the raw JSON right there. So yeah, that's essentially the basics of how we would make a REST call and hit the database and come back with the data. In the next video, I'll do a little bit more with this constants service to produce the data in a way that's going to be more useful for the project. See you later. Bye.